Hi, friends, and my dear children. I am your Chittaluri SN. Today, I would like to teach you a lesson, a long walk to freedom. A long walk to freedom. Hi, dear friends, and my dear children. So, today, I would like to teach a lesson with the title A Long Walk to Freedom. So, before going to the lesson, let us have a look at the fare sheet. So, fare sheet is given with the title Freedom, and there are two pictures. So, please look at the pictures given in your fare sheet. So, there are two pictures were given, and under those pictures, two questions are also asked. The first question goes on like this: what do you know about the great persons in these pictures? Yes, there are two persons. Two great persons are there. Did you notice? I hope you noticed. So, the first great personality, the outstanding personality, is none other than is father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi. The second outstanding personality, the famous personality of the world, is Nelson Mandela, who was the first president of South Africa. Right? So these are the famous persons. And next question: what similarities do you find in their lives? Yes, whenever we think about similarities between these two persons, the most important similarities we observe between these two persons are both of them famous personalities and great leaders who fought for the freedom of independence of their people. So Mahatma Gandhi fought for the independence of our nation, and he fought for the freedom of our people of our India. And coming to Nelson Mandela also fought for the freedom of his people. Particularly, he fought for the freedom and independence of colored people belonging to Africa. So he fought for the people of African nation. Okay, and both these people, both these great leaders, fought using a great weapon which was applauded by the world famous icons, even that is non-violence. They used the method of non-violence, non-violence procedure, and they use non-violence as a great weapon to fight for freedom of their people. So these are the similarities we can observe between these two famous icons of the world. I hope you understood well this face sheet. Okay, friends? Thank you. Okay, friends, now let's get into the lesson with the title A Long Walk to Freedom. First, I'll read out the lesson and later I'll explain. Please listen to me. In life, every man has two obligations. In life, every man has twin obligations. Obligations to his family, to his parents, to his wife and children, and he has an obligation to his people, his community, and his country. In a civil and humane society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclinations and abilities. But in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth and color to fulfill both of those obligations. In South Africa, a man of color who attempted to live as a human being was punished and isolated. In South Africa, a man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people was inevitably ripped from his family and his home and was forced to live a life apart, a twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. I did not in the beginning choose to praise my people above my family, but in attempting to serve my people, I found that I was prevented from fulfilling my obligations as a son, a brother, a father, and a husband. Okay, friends? So, actually, this is a lesson and in the form of a speech, or here Nelson Mandela, the great leader of the world, he himself saying, is sharing his opinions in the form of a speech with his people, and he is sharing his experience with his people. Not only with his people, he has given this message to all over the world. So, in the first paragraph of our lesson, what he says, in life, every man has twin obligations, he says, which means in life of every individual in the society, the man has twin obligations. Particularly, the man has two obligations, he says. The number one is an obligation to his family, to his parents, to his wife and children. So, what is an obligation? It is a responsibility. Every individual in the society has a responsibility which is yet to be performed, which is assured to be performed. That is a responsibility which has been assured to be performed by that particular individual in the society. What is the first obligation? He says the first obligation of a man in the society is to his family, to his parents, to his wife and children. And also he says the man has an obligation to the second obligation the man has. It is an obligation to his people and his community and his country. So likewise, the major responsibilities of an individual in the society is these are the two obligations, he says. One is to his family and one is to his nation, to his community and to his country and to his people where he is living. So this is what Nelson Mandela says. And also he says, in a civil and humane society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclinations and abilities. So he opines, he says, in a civil and humane society where the people living, where the civilians are living with a freedom of expression, where they can live freely, where the society is full of human beings, where the society is with full of people of humanity. So there he says each man is able to fulfill these two obligations which he had told earlier to us, according to his own inclinations and abilities. That particular individual is able to fulfill these two obligations according to his inclinations. Inclinations in the sense, these are the feelings that makes a person to do something. So those are called inclinations. And African leader Nelson Mandela says that in that sort of society, where the humane society, humane society, and where the society with the civility, that each individual of that society is able to fulfill these two obligations which he had shared with us earlier in his speech here. It's very easy thing for an individual in that sort of society. An individual easily he will be able to fulfill those two obligations. He says an individual easily can fulfill those obligations with his own inclinations and abilities. He says, but in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth. He says, but it is easy for every man, each and every man who lives in a society of civility and humanity to fulfill those two obligations here. And he compares his nation and he compares his experience here. What does he say here? He says that, but in a country like South Africa, South Africa, it was almost impossible. What was impossible? To fulfill those two obligations is almost impossible. And for a man of my birth, he says, for a man of his birth, for a man of him, it's really an impossible thing to fulfill those two obligations which he had shared with us, he says. And he says here, Nelson Mandela says here that it's almost impossible for a man of my birth and color, because he is the man of he belongs to African country here. He is a man of my birth in the sense here he was born in his country there where he was born. So as he was born there as an African there, it was impossible for him. That's what he says here. And also he used the word colored. He is a colored man. Colored man in the sense here, he is a black man, comparing to the white people in that society there, where the white people's domination has been more and more. So just he is representing himself that he is a colored man. He is a black man. So being a black man here and being was born in that country there, it is almost impossible for me, he says here. Obligations which he had shared with us earlier, it is almost to fulfill those two obligations is almost impossible. That's what he says here. And also he says, in South Africa, a man of color who attempted to live as a human being was punished and isolated. See that, what he is saying here. In South Africa, he says, a man of color who attempted to live as a human being, a man of color, a colored man, a black man who even attempted to live, if he attempts to live as a human being, that man was punished. That man was isolated by the rest of the society. That's what he says here. In South Africa, a man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people was inevitably ripped from his family. And also one more point he wants to focus here. A man, a colored man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people, if he wants to hold the responsibility as a duty, if he wants to hold a responsibility of his people, if he wants to do something good to his people, if he feels that it is his responsibility to do something good to his people, that man was also inevitably ripped from his family. He was shunned by his family. He was expelled from his family group. That's what here he says. He was separated, meaning he was not at all encouraged by his family members. He may be even ill-treated by his family members. See, that's what here Nelson Mandela expresses his opinion here. And also his home and was forced to live a life apart. He completely, the man who wants to try to fulfill his duty to his people also was completely, inevitably, he will be ripped from his family and his home. And also that particular man was forced to live a life apart. He was forced to live separately. He was forced to live, being away even from his family and his home also. That's what he says here. a twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. And that man, particular man who wants to do something good to his people, being a colored man, if he wants to do something to his people, if he wants to do something good to his people, he will completely be ripped from his family and home, and also he was forced to live a life of separation, a life apart. Meaning here he will be separated from his home and family also. And his existence will become that it's an existence of secrecy and rebellion. He has to, he will have to live that sort of life, a life of secrecy and a life of rebellion. He wants to, he will have to live in this society, he says that. I did not in the beginning choose to praise my people above my family. And also he says that he did not in the beginning choose to praise his people above his family. Actually, he did not think that he has to choose his people, his place to his people above his family. He had never thought so, he says. But in attempting to serve my people, I found that I was prevented from fulfilling my obligations as a son, a brother, a father, a husband. And also, what does he say here? What is he saying here? When Nelson Mandela was attempting to serve his people, then he found that he was prevented from fulfilling his obligations as a son, as a father, as a brother, as a husband. So, which means here, what is he saying here? Actually, he did not choose to place his people above his family in the beginning. But in attempting, in putting his efforts, when he started putting his effort to serve his people, that was the time he found that he was prevented from fulfilling his obligations. Completely he was prevented by his society. For what? To fulfill his obligations. To fulfill his obligations as a son, to fulfill his obligations as a brother, to fulfill his obligations as a father, even to fulfill his obligations as a husband also. He was completely prevented, he was completely avoided by his society. That's what he is sharing with us here. Okay, friends. And I was not born with a hunger to be free. I was born free, free in every way that I could know. And also he says here, he was not born with a hunger to be free. He was not born with a hunger to be free. There is no intention, there is no strong desire in his mind to live, to be free. So what is the meaning of freedom? In his society also at the time, he mightn't have been realized actually that. So there, he was not at all, he was not born with a hunger to be free. There should be, he was not born with a strong desire to be free in his society earlier. But he was born free, free in every way that I could know. But what he felt, but he was born free. As it is said, every individual in this world was born free. The man is born to be free. Likewise here, he was born free. Free in every way that he could know. Every way, whatever the way that he wants to know here, whatever the way that he wants to able to know, in all the ways, he was born free. By birth, he was given a freedom like a man in this society. That's what he feels here. Free to run in the fields near my mother's hut, free to swim in the clear stream that ran through my village. And he explains here how he was born free here, in what sort of things that he was born free here. So he says here, he says himself here, Nelson Mandela says himself here, in what sort of things that he was born free here. He says, He was born free to run in the fields near my mother's hut. To run in the fields nearby his mother's hut. Just he felt himself that he had a freedom of running nearby his mother's hut. If he goes on running, nobody will be there to stop him here. Nobody will be there to question him. Hey, why you are running in this way here like that? So he has that freedom of running there. That's what he says here to this. And also he says that he was born free to swim in the clear stream that ran through my village, he says. And also he was free. He was free to run through, he was free to swim in the clear stream which ran through his village. There was a clear stream which ran in his village there. So he was very free to swim in that stream. In the stream of river. If he wants to swim there, nobody can stop him. Nobody can ask him to stop. Nobody is there to avoid him, to deprive of him swimming in the stream of a river there. So he was born free to swim in the stream. That's what he says here. And also he says here he was born free to roast mealies under the stars and ride the broad backs of slow moving bulls. And also he feels himself that he was born free to roast mealies, which means maize, the kernel of maize. So he is very free to roast. If he wants to roast the mealies there to eat up, so nobody can stop him. Freely, out of his own will and wish, freely he can roast mealies, and he can eat them up. Under the stars of beautiful sky, he can roast mealies freely. He will never be stopped by anybody there. So he was born free to roast mealies under the stars, he says. And also ride the broad backs of slow moving bulls. And if he wants to ride by sitting on the backs of slow moving bulls also, yes, he can ride. He has a freedom of riding, sitting on the backs of bulls. Village side, generally we see that. Small children, countryside, small children will be sitting on the backs of buffaloes, and they will be riding. So likewise here, bulls also even sometimes. So here he says that he wants to sit on the back of the bulls, and if he wants to make a ride, so there will be no restriction to him. He was very free for that. He can freely do it. That's what he says here. And also he says here, as long as I obeyed my father and abided by the customs of my tribe, I was not troubled by the laws of man or God. So wonderful, important thing here. He has told